everyone again. Thank you for joining today's training on case management foundations. This is the first of four-part series on case management fundamentals. This training is presented to you by Switchboard, a one-stop resource hub for refugee service providers in the United States, in partnership with Center for Adjustment, Resilience, and Recovery, which you'll hear as referenced with an acronym of CARE. For those of you who are not familiar with CARE, it's a project of the International Rescue Committee and the National Child Traumatic Stress Network via the generous support of the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration. My name is Tigest Coleman, and I'm Switchboard's training officer. I'm joined by my co-host today, Rebecca Milqueen, and you'll be hearing from Rebecca in the chat throughout today's training. I'd like to mention that today's session will run for 1 hour and 30 minutes, and that it's been recorded. You'll receive an email with the recording, slides, and recommended resources within 24 hours. The webinar transcript, along with the recording, will also be posted on the Switchboard website within the following days. Let's take a look at some of our settings in Zoom. All attendees are currently muted and are joined in listen-only mode. You may switch your audio between your computers and phone at any time under audio settings in the lower left corner of your screen. Due to the very large size of the webinar we have, we've disabled the chat box for now, as it would be moving too quickly to follow. But keep an eye on the chat for messages from Switchboard and links to various resources we'll be mentioning throughout. We'll be enabling the chat box for exercise and discussion that we have planned for you later. You can open the chat window by clicking the chat bubble icon located on the left center of your screen. Make sure you send your messages to all panelists and attendees so fellow participants can read and respond to your comments. That does not mean that we don't want to hear from you. Please type your questions in the Q&A box and we'll address them during the Q&A time. Please type your questions, and if you have or you see another participant's question you want to upvote, you can click the thumbs up. We've also reviewed the questions you submitted during the pre-registration, and we plan to cover many of them during the training. Finally, you have the option to turn on automated closed captioning on today's webinar. To do so, you can click the CC or the live transcript. You may choose subtitles or the full transcript. You also have options to change the font size and other parameters. You may turn the closed captioning on and off at any time as well. Keep in mind that the closed captioning for today's webinar is automated and it may not be completely accurate. Following the webinar, we'll post a fully edited transcript of the Switchboard website, as we do for all our audio and video materials. I am honored to be facilitating this training with two incredibly talented and passionate individuals you'll be hearing from shortly. Starting with myself, again, my name is Tigest Coleman, and I'm Switchboard's training officer. I am a licensed clinical social worker with many years of experience working with refugees, immigrants, and other forcibly displaced populations. I also want to mention that my professional work was founded on the intimate journey that my own family experienced as refugees and immigrants, emphasizing that my experience is very limited and not a blanket application to the unique experience of others. We have Jessica Dalpe, who's a licensed social worker and working as a senior technical advisor for safety and wellness at International Rescue Committee. We also have Luan Mai, who's a clinical psychologist and researcher who has served and serves as the technical advisor, mental health and psychosocial support for International Rescue Committee. With that, we'll move to the learning objectives. So our hope is that the information we share today can be applied by a range of social service providers in different settings and across different client groups, with a special focus for refugees or those that are forcibly displaced. Therefore, the learning objectives we have to cover, or we hope to cover for today's trainings, are to describe what case management means in the context of refugee service delivery, to identify the phases of case management, recognize the uniqueness of case management for refugee clients, and build trust and also building on the trust and engaging to support the adjustments and well-being. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Jess.
Great. Thank you so much, Tigest, and hi, everyone. Welcome. As Tigest had said, my name is Jess Dalpe. I am honored, as always, to be here with Switchboard, to be in this space with you all, to learn from my fantastic and amazing colleagues and co-facilitators, Tigest and Juan, and to learn from all of you as we go through these foundational case management trainings that we have. Before we jump into the content, I just want to say a quick word about the Center for Adjustment, Resilience, and Recovery, as Tigist had mentioned. In addition to supporting our work in the US and Europe around safety and wellness, I also have the wonderful opportunity to work alongside Luan and other colleagues at IRC on this really unique and wonderful project. We get to focus on providing quality mental health and psychosocial support services for children and family who have experienced forced displacement by really acting as a bridge between all of the providers, all of you on this call, refugee and immigrant service providers and mental health providers. Our aim is really to ensure that people and agencies providing these services are trauma-informed, culturally appropriate, and guided by best practices. So as Rebecca had dropped into the chat, we have a short voluntary survey that we're asking if you all have it in you to be able to respond to. It should take no more than a minute at most, but it's to help us get an idea of the different positions and specialties represented across all of you wonderful folks on this call. The information that we gather in this survey will help CARE track and represent the reach of this webinar, and will only be accessed by our team at CARE. We won't share it externally, except in aggregate. You will also have the option to sign up for CARE's distribution list so that you have access to additional mental health and trauma-informed care resources. However, unless you choose to join the list, your name and email address will not be used. We won't contact you. We promise we won't spam you. But if you have any questions or concerns about that, please reach out to us at CARE, C-A-R-R-E, at rescue.org. But thanks again for taking the time out, even if you wait till we have our break, to take a few seconds to just respond to that survey. We'd really appreciate it. But without further ado, let's get into what we came here to talk about, case management. So I have the wonderful privilege to get us started and talking a little bit about the overview of case management. So we want to start by really getting us anchored in the roles, the goals, and the expectations that we have of ourselves as case managers and that our clients have of us. So we want to start actually by hearing from you all. So we have on our next slide a Slido. So if you can, there are two ways to participate. I know if you've been on Switchboard webinars, y'all are probably pro at this. But if this is new for you, you can use a smartphone by pointing the camera at the QR code at the top of the screen, and that will be able to pop up a link and you can go right to the Slido. Or you can go to slido.com and enter in the participant code, which is 282184. And what we'd really like to hear from you all is, what are some of the words that you associate with case management? Either words that you use yourselves or words that you've heard others use. And so as you are in there, you can type in those words and we'll see them come up on the Slido. So I'm already seeing, oh yeah, you should all, if you're in there, you pointed the QR code, you shouldn't have to enter the Slido number, but that's coming up big, which is good in case you forget it. But my goodness, you all are quick typers here. Seeing overwhelming was one of the first ones that I saw. Now I'm seeing advocate, support. I love these. These are always a challenge in how much focus I can have. Feel like I'm getting my eyes tested. Right? I see caseworker, documentation, juggling, resources. Stressful is starting to become a little bit bigger in terms of the word cloud. So if you aren't familiar with word clouds, the bigger the word, that means the more of you have written that word in there. So we're really seeing resources, support, advocate, stressful, compassion showing up there, care, service, coordination. I saw some case notes in there and documentation. Oh, ethical dilemmas, burnout and overworked. It's interesting. Those were kind of grouped together for a moment. So much in time management, which is a wonderful and difficult skill. Oh, this is fantastic. Underpaid. See family in caps. All in uppercase letters there. Many roles, wonderful. So many important keywords to really focus on where we are and how we anchor ourselves to case management. You all picked up on so many of these keywords that you see here on the slide. Case management is this umbrella of so many things that we do. It's one of my favorite parts of being a social worker is case management. It's also been one of the most stressful roles that I have had in my professional career. There is kind of no one universally accepted definition of case management. But the definition that we're working with for this training and for this series is really focused on case management as a process that facilitates the achievement of client wellness and autonomy. And we do that through a bunch of different things, right? We do it via individual level change, right? Through assessing needs, services, and opportunities. And we also do it through working with systems, both with clients and on our own for systems level change to improve access, to remedy inequitable systems, and to create stronger opportunities for clients and communities. Right? On an individual level, we really focus on linking clients with appropriate providers, right? That coordination with appropriate resources based on the needs and values of the clients that we have learned through assessment. Right? We also focus on collaborating and coordinating with other key individuals in clients' lives. And we really focus in on ensuring that the care that is provided and the services that we provide as case managers, but also other service providers are providing for clients are safe, effective, client-centered, timely, efficient, accessible, and equitable. Right? So there's a lot that we're focusing on. And all throughout this, right, we use our advocacy skills to address system level changes, to improve access, and to address some of these inequitable and highly complex services and systems that clients have to navigate and that we navigate alongside with them. So we do a lot. Because visuals are always helpful, we like to kind of have this little visual of the different relationships that a case manager will have with a client and with others. So in the case management system and in the case management role, there are lots of different players. The most important in this is the client, right? We are incredibly client-centered, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And how we provide services, how we look at the needs, how we look at the resources and the strengths that exist for clients. So we partner and we really work alongside clients to decide with them what they need, what we can support them with, and how to get them connected to different resources. We also partner very closely with professional networks, right? We as case managers are not meant to be the only ones providing services. We can't and nor should we be doing everything in terms of meeting clients' needs, right? We partner with clients to build on their own resiliency, to build on their own resourcefulness. We also partner with other professional networks, like community organizations, other social service providers, medical providers, and a whole host of other government agencies or education providers, right? We really are that link, so creating that triangle we see at the top of this slide. And important to this, but not always someone that we are directly connected to, are the client's social networks and social support systems, right? Recognizing that our work with clients that we serve is not in a vacuum, that it is influenced by those important people in clients' lives. So we want to also focus on how the client is able to access and connect with family, friends, community members, and loved ones to be able to support them upon their journey of identifying their needs and setting goals with us, and then reaching goals through the case management process. And so how do we do all of this? We will get into that both today and also in other webinars. But when we are really entering into the case management relationship with clients, we want to really focus in on guiding principles and key principles and how we do what we do, so that we are really accessing the values of the work, and we're putting those values into action through the case management relationship. So the case management relationship, which we talk about a lot and will continue to talk about, is kind of the core function of the work that we do as case managers, right? It's creating a strong relationship that is founded upon mutual respect, right? So really looking at how are we creating a relationship that honors and really emphasizes the expertise that the client has, right? And also that honors the relationship that we're creating and in that case management process, right? So there is that mutual respect. We don't hold all the answers. We don't hold all of the resources, nor should we, right? We are partners with our clients in being able to assess needs, to be able to talk about goals, to be able to navigate through barriers. And that is founded upon mutual respect within the case management relationship. Right? Our other guiding principles include equity in care and access. Right? So this really looks like being able to work with clients and recognizing, as you all said in the word cloud, right? We're working on time management, caseloads, feeling burnt out, right? So thinking about the varied case needs that exist on our caseloads and being able to provide equity in that care, right? Being able to provide care that is reflective of that client's barriers that they face, reflective of the needs that they have, and really building upon the strengths, resources, and resiliency that they have. So really wanting to ensure that we are being equitable in that approach, right? And that may look like spending more time with one client as opposed to other clients, right? Not saying, okay, I spend an hour every week with each one of my clients. So maybe there's a week where you spend 2 hours with one client and you only spend 15 minutes with a phone check-in for another client, right? But being equitable and making sure that we are meeting the needs according to that client's unique situation. The right to self-determination, which we will talk about a little bit more later today and also in other webinars that we have, but really wanting to focus in on the agency that clients have and the fact that they are truly the guides. They know where the destination is. They know what goals that they want to achieve, right? And that they have the right to decide what their priorities are and how to get there, right? I tend to think of it as we get to kind of be the map app for our clients, right? And that case management process. So if you think about whatever application you use on your phone, and you kind of put in your destination on your map, right? You can choose if you want to go the route that will avoid tolls, if you live in an area that has tolls, as I do. If you want to avoid highways, right? If you want to add a stop to that destination, we kind of get to play that role of the map app, right? We're not deciding where the destination is. We're not necessarily deciding how to get there, but we can access different resources along the way. We can remove barriers, right? Looking at where there's traffic on the route and if there's an alternative route to go on, right? We get to really maximize the client's right to self-determination, their ability to make decisions and have autonomy over the process. Cultural humility, which we will continue to talk about, excuse me, but being able to really focus in on the fact that we do not know everything about different cultures, nor will we ever know everything, right? So having that approach of a learner and having that curiosity in learning about how culture, how different processes, how different routines show up for different clients, right? And being able to really bring that into the case management relationship and building that mutual understanding, the respect, and really that honoring of what clients are bringing into the case management process and how that impacts their goals and their ways of working with us. We also are focusing in on the key principle of the socio-ecological perspective, right? So we talked about this a little bit on the last slide, but we are not just looking at our work in a, with blinders on, focusing only on the client case manager relationship, right? We're looking at the client within the context that they're living, right? So we're looking at them within the context of their communities and their social connections, the other providers and systems that they're interacting with, the larger community and context in which they are living, the community and context from which they were coming, right? What is their experience of displacement? What does that look like, and how is that impacting the case management process? All things that I promise we will talk about in more detail. And last but not least on this slide is really, sorry, Rebecca, I know I'm jumping around here, but last but not least is really do no harm, right? Through all of our work, we want to make sure that we are focusing on doing no harm in the case management process. Now, this sounds kind of obvious, like, of course, we don't want to do harm. We all are in this work because we care very deeply and are passionate about being helpers, about being supportive, right? Thinking of some of those really big words on the word cloud, right? Supportive, being advocate, right? Our goal is really to do the best that we can and to have the best kind of joint shared outcomes for our clients as possible. However, that doesn't mean that sometimes there are unintended negative consequences of our actions or impacts, right? So we always want to be thinking about how we can do no harm, right? So being attentive to emotional, physical, economic, social, and environmental safety in the work that we do. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in perspective when we talk about trauma-informed care, both later today and in our next webinar. But that is always one of our principles, is how do we create a safe environment. And so the last kind of piece that I want to talk about before I'll hand it off to Lon is the impact of labels and language on our work, right? So thinking about the incredibly important role that language plays in the work that we do in case management. So we want to make sure that we are being really attentive to how we speak about our work and the activities that we facilitate within the case management relationship. This language that we use is really reflective of how we see our roles and how we see the work that we do with clients and what our expectations are, both of ourselves as case managers and also of clients in the role of receiving services and partnering in the service provision relationship. So this comes into play when we talk about descriptions and how we talk about the work that we do and the role that we play, right? We say, I'm a case manager and I am here to, get you all of the resources that you need. I'm here to make you happier and make your life better, right? What are we saying in that kind of language? Are we saying that the clients that we serve don't have the capacity to be happy without us? And are we saying that we have the capabilities to pull out our magic wand and make life better, right? So being really attentive to the language that we use, even things that I have already fallen into a few times, of saying things like my client or our client, right? What is that ownership kind of portraying, right? Is that we feel a sense of fidelity, that we really want to be connected to others and the clients that we serve? Or are we saying that, they are mine and we're kind of being a little overprotective and paternal or maternalistic, right, towards the clients that we serve? So being really aware of the language that we use and the labels that we use and how that impacts the client's access to care and other service engagements. An example of this is if we say, oh, this client that I'm working with is just so dramatic, right? How are we interpreting what they are saying to us, how they're saying it, and how are we putting our own lens and judgment on that? And then what kind of an impact does that have on the work that we do with clients, and also the work that others do? If they hear us say, oh, this client is very dramatic, will that impact their medical professionals' view of how the client is sharing their symptoms, right? So really wanting to be mindful of how we talk about this work. And so that brings us to this next slide that we have, which is a little bit on a way that we can introduce the role of a case manager, right? As you all put into that beautiful word cloud that we had, right? Case management is so many things, and it can be really hard to explain, and hard to explain in a way that honors both the fantastic skills that all of you have in the case management provision, and also the fantastic skills that clients have, right? To really emphasize that partnership. So we wanted to give an example of a simple statement of explaining and introducing case management. So for example, if you are maybe working with a new client, you might say, hi, I'm Jess and I'm your case manager. As a case manager, my job is to work with you to help you access the support and services you need to feel stable and supported. The case management program will last for up to 6, 12, 3, however many months that you're providing services. In that time, we will work as a team to identify the things or information you need, and we will create a plan together for how I can support and guide you. You can reach me here in the office when we're open, which is Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 5 p.m. or whatever your hours are. You can also call or text me during those hours on this number, and I will do my best to respond within one business day, right? So being able to clearly articulate that this is a partnership, what we will work together on is identifying kind of needs and the things that clients want, the information, the services that they need, but also being able to put some of those boundaries and parameters in place, right? We will work together for X number of months, whatever your program is. Or if you have a flexible program length of time, and we say we will work for anywhere between 6 to 12 months, depending upon what services you need. But also being able to talk about how you provide services, right? I work Monday through Friday, and these are the hours that you can reach me, and these are the ways that you can contact me, right? Wanting to really be mindful of explaining what this professional relationship looks like, and being able to set expectations both for ourselves as case managers and also for clients, so they know what to expect of us. They'll know that if they call us on a Saturday, unless we have an emergency kind of contact line that our office uses, we will not be answering that call on a Saturday. Right? So being able to really be mindful of how we're explaining the work that we do to adequately set expectations and begin to set kind of the healthy boundaries within that relationship founded upon the mutual respect. And so with that, I will hand it off to Lon to talk a little bit more about phases of case management and many other wonderful things.
Thank you, Jess. Hello, everyone. Jess went over for us the foundations of case management. What I would like to do is go over the phases of case management with you and to understand that that happens in parts. What we would like to do first in terms of looking at initial engagement, let's think of it as the intake process, the assessment, the rapport building. This is your opportunity as a caseworker to introduce the idea of case management, your role as a case management, and the client's role, so that they understand what to expect from you and what the work will be like. It's your time to get to know them, of course, and for the client to get to know you, and for you to start beginning identifying their strengths, their resources, possible barriers, and the needs that they may present in the work together. The next part is goal setting, and goal setting is really about your assessment process in terms of how or what goals will be needed, how that service will be provided, and that includes the referral process and setting up those activities. This is where the bulk of case management happens in terms of your activities with the client and for the client. through it. It really cannot happen without a really good initial engagement, because to get to goal setting, you have to understand from the client's point of view what their needs are. And this is where you develop, you update, and you carry out those plans to meet the client's goal. Termination. Now, termination is planning for the completion of those goals and the transition, if there is a transition in care and services. And it starts at day one. And I know some folks, when we think about termination, we may think about the negative process of termination. But if we approach this in a very clear-sighted way with the client, it actually leads us to successful termination and successful planning for that termination. It also helps with, in terms of case management, to help the client navigate the systems, access services, and then to build the skills that they'll need to be able to go past what you can provide them after your service ends. So in terms of termination, we really encourage you to think of it in terms of being able to move forward and helping the client to move forward. Now, the initial engagement, which is rapport building, is really important. I'm sure everyone understands that. We're in this work because there's a part of us that cares about the person who's sitting with us, who's asking for help. So then relationship in the sense of time and roles may be culturally different, which is something we have to acknowledge when we look at rapport building. In terms of needs that come from extreme experiences that may be traumatic, that's something we always have to keep in mind. And that's where trauma-informed care is, in terms of being able to picture with the client and for them the difficulties that may come up, and to be able to address that, and to be able to voice that reality with them and for them. Obviously, to approach with a learner's lens and guide the conversation with cultural consideration. So for trauma-informed care with case management, the rapport building really looks at understanding relationship and the sense of time and roles that may be culturally different. Consider how the client is approaching the relationship based on their needs that come from extreme experiences that may be traumatic. Some of these experiences may include legal, ethical, regulatory requirements that we have to keep in mind, and we have to be able to establish so that it's a safe and effective practice and environment for our client. One of the most important aspects of case management is simply to develop a rapport with the client, the family, and the service providers that helps the client move along with their goals. It's also maintaining the intention of transparency and open communication. It's very important in terms of foundation of case management and meeting the legal and your regulatory requirements. For cultural considerations, we ask you to look at your own approach and ideas of culture, beliefs, and values, so that you have an awareness of your own biases and places of discomfort. Come from a learner stance. Be curious. Use the phrase, "tell me more." And that's something maybe you want to practice in a way that's genuine to you and how it comes out. But it's very important to be able to communicate to your client that you want to learn as much as they want to learn about how they're rebuilding and what they need to do to rebuild their life. It's really important for them to have a sense that you want to learn about them. So take some time to create some learning investments, activities for yourself, develop skills to work with interpreters, look at resources that may strengthen the relationships, and show willingness to listen deeply and directly. Expect to take more time to build trust and rapport with clients. Learn how names are pronounced, ask their preferences if they would like to be addressed a certain way. Consider offering tea or something culturally familiar to them to acknowledge that the client comes from a certain life perspective and experience, and that you value that. Consider starting off with questions that may be more comfortable for the client, like, "Tell me about your family," or "What are some things you like to do in your free time?" Appreciate that they may have pressing needs, like being able to pay rent and to get employment. It may be at the top of their mind and really urgent. If your agency offers case management service, consider partnering in a care team so that immediate pressures can be addressed while emotional support is offered. And just as Jess was just sharing with us, we cannot expect one person to address all the needs at one point. We must be able to collaborate together, to work across, so that we can literally be able to help build a life that is sustaining, but also broad-reaching in terms of all the different parts of life that are important to them. Acknowledge that their journey has been long and that you want to be part of their journey. So in this, we're speaking about the roles, responsibilities, and expectations. It means that we do recommend that you are clear, accurate, and realistic in your introduction of your role. I think Jess just gave us a really good script on how to approach that. So being very clear, accurate, and realistic is very helpful for the client in terms of establishing our roles in the beginning. It's also important to recognize how you build boundaries. Again, part of clear communication is setting clear boundaries. And then in terms of how you recognize urgency, do you have a sense of, for the client, that they're communicating something that is very immediate, stressful, and in need? Do you have the sense of being able to match that and communicate that with the client? Beware of the sense of urgency to help clients right away. How might you help clients identify their own resources for building resiliency and addressing things that come up in an urgent way? Do you have the ability to navigate a moment that could be quite difficult, what we know as opening a can of worms, of whether we can address a situation or not? It really asks us to be intentional and considerate of the questions that clients may come with, but that we may actually open ourselves. So an example is that near the end of a client meeting, you ask if the client there is feeling hopeful about what they're doing. And the client grows quiet, starts to tear up, and she starts crying, but can't seem to stop. Then she says, I feel alone when the kids are at school. When my husband's at work, I'm all alone. And I start thinking of all the things we have lost. And our family, we don't know if they are still alive. I get so sad and I can't see how we can get back to everything we have lost. She keeps crying, and you see your next client already standing at the door. They've already arrived for your appointment together. And he can see both of you through the window of the door. So in this scenario, in terms of opening a can of worms, it has a lot to do with timing, your timing, as well as the content and context of the environment. In this situation, asking a client about something that they could find distressing near the end of a session does not give you time to provide a holding environment that protects their sense of emotional balance. Being able to judge timing is really important. Now, if a client is coming in with specific goals and is moving towards achieving those goals, emphasize their resilience and strength in doing that. Making general statements about difficulties or distress takes the client's focus off of their goals and what their achievements are. Emphasize the content and context of their achievement and resilience through the meeting. If you believe there are underlying feelings of distress that the client may be experiencing, we ask you to consider bringing up your concerns at the beginning of the session so that the client really has time to express what they need. Consider a referral within your team or a mental health provider who can see the client on a regular basis to support the client's needs. And 3, emphasize their achievements toward their goals while normalizing how feelings may fluctuate as they adapt and feel more secure in what they're doing. As you know, a large part of case management also has to be taking perspective and sharing perspective with the client. So having these questions will help you in terms of looking at the context, the content, and the time of when you ask questions in case management, and looking at what the expectations, your roles, and responsibilities may be. So in goal setting, which is in terms of phases of case management, is obviously a very important process. You establish this with the client, not for them. Goal planning is fundamental to case management, is a statement defining the expected outcomes for the client within the agreed time frame of the service. Caseworkers and clients identify specific goals that may be short or long-term goals, and then systematically break them down into incremental behaviors or actions needed to be accomplished to achieve each goal. When establishing the goals, it's important to know whether the need is immediate, intermediate, or long-term. Establish these with the client. Clients should be involved in all stages and goal setting. However, we do recognize that services may be mandated, and in those situations, clients may not always be as cooperative with certain goals that are needed. It really depends on the severity of the problem and the focus. So we do ask you to look at goals as a realistic, sensible, and time-bound agreement, and to make sure you communicate this clearly at the beginning of your case management work. Make sure the goals are attainable and make sense to the client. Establish agreed upon plans that are practical and modeled so that the client understands and can see how it works. Now, there are cultural considerations for goal setting that needs to be recognized and acknowledged. Obviously, the client's perceptions, experiences, and need for services are really important to understand culturally. Learn more about the ways decisions are made, where the client comes from, or decisions made collectively with the family. Does the client have a sense of being able to make decisions individually? Does your client need time to consult with the family about prioritizing and committing to goals? Are there value judgments in certain goals in terms of education or work or outside activities of the home? And how do you help them make a decision that are realistic for their reality? So for their reality in the context of their cultural experience in life. This brings us to how to respond to clients' needs. But we should review about how to respond to clients' needs. We help decide what to do next when centering clients' voice and choice. Weigh the difference in clients' and caseworkers' explanatory model. This means to check the reference to really understand what the client is going through. And this could be something as simple as describe what is happening to you. What does it look like? What does it feel like? What do you think is causing this? What would you do about this problem if you were in this country? And we also ask you to screen for vulnerabilities and risk factors. Make sure that's part of how you approach the assessment and the goal setting with the client. We need to consider the emotional and behavioral signs and symptoms of the client. Some may present with a sense of panic just because of how long their journey has been or how isolated they may feel. Appreciate that there may be low threshold for frustration, sense of feeling out of control, born of all the recent trauma or incidents they've had to go through. Some may appear to shut down, have extreme sadness, feelings of helplessness or loss. Physically, some of the signs and symptoms you may want to look for includes restlessness, headaches, and fatigue. Individuals in crisis may express difficulty sleeping, eating, or caring for their child, or obviously maintaining their learning abilities to learn a second, third language, depending upon whether English is their second, third, or fourth, or fifth language. That is a new language for them. So therefore, how they may feel physically would affect how they take in language learning activities. And obviously job placement and other daily activities. We need to see how they're adapting to that and what their physical signs and symptoms may be a challenge for them to get to. Recognize when a situation is outside your scope of work and triage where necessary. Again, it really brings us back to what Jess was saying in the beginning for foundations, is that you do need to consider working across teams, working with team members so that you can collaborate successfully, plan the referral process, and be able to really stick to the goals that in terms of activities are manageable. Now, what are the key areas? We say assess, we say access, and we say triage, but what does that mean? When we say access, we really mean the physical part, the medical and emotional safety of an individual. What is the presenting need of the individual when we say assess? We look at ways the person views this in the context of his or her life and culture, whether it's adaptive or versus strong negative views of what's going on. What is a priority? Remember, as Jess was saying, we cannot resolve everything. In terms of access for case management, we need to think about what are the client's internal and external resources, their physical, emotional, spiritual, relational, and practical experiences. Again, let me just say, I just want to be clear, physical, emotional, spiritual, relational, and practical. What are these resources and experiences internally that they hold? We also need to know who are the client's community in terms of who they identify with, and if there are resources in those communities that could be helpful for them, and how these community partners or advocates can support the work in terms of the goals that you have set forth together. When we speak about triage, it's understanding when a situation is outside our scope of work or expertise. And it really means being able to refer and identify what other resources are needed. So a brief word of caution to this is that we always want to start from a place of acknowledging strengths and not deficits. There are times that specific interventions are needed and require referrals. And this is not because you are failing as a case manager, it's actually because you're being very attuned to the various needs that may come up. So triaging is actually a support for you as well as the client. Now, boundaries, as Jess was saying from the beginning, is really important. And I think we saw a bit of that on Slido as you all were inputting what case management words are most present for you. And boundary setting ties in very much to the experience of the work. And they really help establish a relationship of mutual respect. They reinforce the professional relationship. Boundaries support equity as well in terms of clients receiving consistent services, treatment, and care. And boundaries actually are very essential in terms of work-life balance. And it's really critical for sustaining your participation in this profession. So within your roles and responsibility, we ask that you establish an atmosphere of mutual respect, reinforce the relationship as professional, support equity as all clients receive consistent services, treatment, and care, and understand that inception becomes an expectation when we are not able to define boundaries clearly. So in terms of that, try to not be in a place where you're not working extra hard to explain why you did one thing that was outside your scope of work and why you can't do it again. When you start thinking of the word doing favors for someone, ask yourself if that's because you're going outside of your scope of work. Boundaries also help protect your personal space and work-life balance, as we were just saying, is really critical in terms of thinking of yourself as sustainable. Do you have a sense of being energized from the work, which can be very emotionally rewarding, but is there a sense of burnout because you're not able to feel effective or it feels overwhelming? And we did see a lot of those responses in the Slido activity. And so we do urge you to think of what life-work balance means for you. So what are some ways we can set up the boundaries? It's actually in the way you define your role, how you communicate about your role, and some individuals, in terms of setting boundaries, may think of boundaries as really hard to set. And so we really encourage you to think of boundary as a positive part of the relationship. And we actually like you to share a bit more on in the chat. So we're going to open up the chat about words that you think connect you to a sense of positive boundaries. So I think we'll open up the chat at this time. And
a second to enable the chat.
Thank you, Tigest. So if you can respond all and then type into the chat box there, what sort of words help you to maintain boundaries, healthy boundaries, maintain trust through consistency, applying one's own oxygen mask. Yes, positive professional relationship, self-care. Wonderful. These are really wonderful. Verbalizing. Yes. Understanding, mutual sustainability. You can't pour from an empty cup. Very true. Oh, you guys have it. You're very informed already about taking care of yourself. I can't look out for others if I'm not looking out for myself. Yes. Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. So we do understand that in terms of boundary setting, we have to establish the relationships and establish the rules in the relationship. And one of the things that we do speak about in terms of boundaries is also self-disclosure and deciding when self-disclosure is appropriate and when it is for us versus when it is for the client. This brings us to discharge planning and termination. Again, bringing you back to the other previous slide just now, thinking about how termination is part of a phase of case management. That termination can be quite positive in terms of defining the professional relationship together, in terms of it being timed or termed, connecting to the goal setting and the achievements of the goal. So recognize how discharge planning, it may feel awkward in the beginning because you're thinking about, oh, you know, I'm not going to be with you forever, which is actually boundary setting and positive because they won't need you forever. They'll be able to adapt and move forward. So to really change that frame of how we look at it, discuss how discharge planning can be a positive. Emphasize how discharge planning is part of a learning opportunity for the client as an adaptive process to the social environment. And in terms of the social environment, introduce how discharge planning recognizes the client's strength and adaptive resiliency. Frame it as an acculturative learning process, an opportunity for the client to be able to say thank you and to learn what a professional relationship looks like, and in a healthy way to be able to say goodbye. In that way, also be open to learning yourself how the client experiences closure or termination. Is there a cultural way of doing it that's respectful? Approach it as a learning opportunity for yourself to structure the relationship and be open to learning about what would be good for the client and how to say thank you and goodbye. It really speaks to us being able to work with the client on their journey and how they're moving forward in terms of the work for case management. Thank you, and I'll turn this over to Tigest to take us to break.
Thank you, Luan. That's a lot of information that we have shared with you all. So we just want to give you about a minute or two break to stretch and get hydrated. And if you haven't already taken the survey that we dropped in the beginning, please complete the short survey that Rebecca put in the link, which I believe you can still access in the beginning, or we can put it in the link again. Thank you. And we'll see you in about a minute or two. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. All right, we're going to try to fly through a few slides so that we can have some interaction and interactive activities that we have planned for you. So in this section, while we're mainly focusing on the term refugees throughout our training, we want to acknowledge that what UNHCR recognizes as a global displacement crisis, to note that millions of forcibly displaced people worldwide. As we stated earlier, the information we're sharing is it's general so that we can give you as a guidance and not prescriptive, and it does not speak specifically about any one culture to be used as a blanket rule. It's really important to note that great cultural and linguistic diversity among refugees in the world is to be considered. Even with that, every refugee is unique, and they have their own singular experiences. Their family histories and family dynamics are very distinctive. As such, there can be no one-size-fits-all approach to working with different populations. Oftentimes, in resettlement services, we can fall into the belief that since people are here in the US and are safe from the conflicts and crises that they fled from, they will want to and are ready to move on, right? Oftentimes we say, why can't you move on? And they, and focus on the future and their hopes and goals for the life of the US. This may be true for some, but for most individuals who have faced forced displacement, the experiences they endured remain with them and have impacts on every step in their journey. It's really important for us as providers to have an understanding of the context from which our clients we serve fled from, the pathways they took to reach to us, and the ambiguous and sometimes conflicting emotions they have about life in the US. Resettlement and asylum are not blanket slates, but a new chapter that cannot exist separate from the previous chapters that they come from. A surge in violent conflicts, both old and new, as we're seeing right now, along with the increasingly disastrous impacts of climate change, has led to a historically and devastating rise in the number of displaced people. And as recognized by the UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, in the first half of 2021, millions more people were forced to flee their homes due to armed conflicts, generalized violence, or human rights violations. Many of them faced additional challenges due to COVID-19, disasters, extreme weathers, and other effects of climate change. So there's a handful of existing resources on Switchboard Library to cover this topic, so I won't really dive into it, but I can tell you that we have over 1,000 resources, so feel free to visit us after the webinar is done. However, I would like to highlight that it's vital to highlight the psychological stages of refugee migration and the intersectionality of these dimensions of the refugee experience in connection to their emotional health and well-being. Refugees are not only experiencing life-altering circumstances prior to or during their flight, but their living conditions once they have reached to safety or to us also impose significant stress and hardship. Arriving in a host community often brings new challenges when dealing with new systems, insufficient languages or lack of social and emotional support that they may have had. Again, without going too deep into this, we want to recognize that forced migration places psychological and social stress on individuals, families, and communities. The hardship that they endured through their displacement makes them vulnerable. Many suffer from trauma, from loss, from violence, family separation, abuse, distractions, influencing their mental health and psychosocial well-being and their vulnerability to mental health problems. They lose assets, they lose their livelihood, and they're unable to plan their future sometimes. These normal emotional reactions, if left unsupported, right? Because sometimes these are normal reactions, but if they are left unsupported with healing support, they can lead to a host of mental health problems, including family violence, harmful coping strategies or practices such as alcohol or drugs, and misuse. So case management, right? As we think about case management to our refugee population, it requires very specialized knowledge for the unique issues resulting in the displacement, and also requires very specialized adaptation and application of mainstream services and intervention. It's also important to note that every person is unique. What may be traumatic to one person may not be to another. So resettlement is heavily influenced by the ability to find and have access to resources, opportunities, and choices. All of this exists within systems and environments within their own challenges, barriers, and expectations and limits. One's immigration status influences what benefits are available to them, what legal activities that they can engage in, and what required and what social activities that they can take in, right? So when we're helping new arrivals to adapt to their new communities, it is with awareness that we must also help them understand and adapt to the social environment. As such, we must also acknowledge the social constraints within the system and the social stressors that would impact the experience of adjustment. At the same time, in the present moment, there are social divisions that would impact how the community may perceive refugees, and in turn impact how the client sees themselves, others, and their sense of safety and choice in the place that they have now taken refuge or safety in. We're also living in a very historic pandemic that changes how clients will connect with others, even with case managers, finding local resources, even how they may share a cup of tea or food together with others to build friendship and rapport. All that is impacted. And starting over, economic security is a big part of feeling hopeful, but an environment of poverty within the community an individual is resettled in will impact resources, including food, clothing, transportation, housing, and sense of hopefulness, really. So for some new arrivals, they may have been well situated socially and economically. The new stressor of poverty should be also acknowledged within and with an emphasis on setting goals to move past that poverty. Lastly, for many new arrivals, It's very new to them to experience such a heterogeneous, generous social environment where they're a cultural minority or identified with a socially constructed group identity themselves. They're not familiar with it. The social inequalities of this oppressive or categories can be very confusing and make it very difficult to build towards a culturative sense of self, right? They're questioning what how they can belong. For a newly arrived refugee who do experience situations with others that appear discriminatory, it's important to acknowledge the stressors and that these are positive as well as challenges that do exist in the US. Remember that resettling to the US is not an end process, but it is in itself the beginning process of pre-learning new social environments and helping them to see that they can grow in their new identity of themselves. So what does that mean in the case management and how does it all come in? While the needs of the specific and specialized needs of refugees and immigrants are very, very different, the main points in the overall case management is that pathway to the stabilization will be very different for very different people. Therefore, it's really important to pay attention to the development of your specific case management relationship, assessment of the client needs, creating goals, some of the internal capacity barriers that they might have, right? External barriers, that systems, the problems, and that also not case managers trying to do enough or expectations that can be matched. I know we have heard sometimes of, I was told I could get a car, or I was told I would be living in a house and not in an apartment. So there's a lot of hardship in case management, and really to just recognize the pathway to stabilization with each of your clients. All right, so we're going to, Rebecca, if you can help me get to the next Slido. Let's make it. So what we have for you is there's a Slido that's going to be appearing here where we want to put together this is the previous one. Hold on a second. We want to put together what we've learned so far, right? Putting it together of how, the question that we want to ask is, how might a newcomer feel welcome in a case management relationship or process? Let me see if I can clear it and go back to it. Sometimes that resets it. If not, I'd be happy to do it myself. Give me 1 second. All right, so we might just, there we go. How might a newcomer feel? The question that we have is, how might a newcomer feel welcome in a case management relationship or process? Maybe we can also enable the chat so that we can have that coming into it, since the Slido seems to have some glitch, but the question is, how might a newcomer feel welcome in a case management relationship or process? What are some, greet in their own language. Thank you, Katie. Cultural awareness, building good rapport, feeling welcome. These are all good. Keep it coming for about 20 more seconds. Understanding, cultural responsive welcoming, feeling welcomed again. Only if interpreters are used, patience, active listening, engagement, empathetic, affirmation, building trust and respect in their narratives, asking about culture. Again, both Jess and Loan had covered, how to come to your clients with the learner's lens, right? Tell me more about that. Tell me more about your culture. Proper cultural humility, giving hope. Thank you all for all this wonderful answers that you gave. All right, we're gonna move us straight into the case management approach, and so that we can have some time to cover and have you give us some Q&A that you might have.
Hi. Thanks, Tigist. Hi again, everyone. Your responses in the chat have been absolutely fantastic, right? And a lot of what you all are talking about really relates to the case management approaches that we use and that really help people feel welcomed in this relationship. So we're going to talk briefly about each one of these different approaches, and then we're going to go into an activity that we have, and we want to hear from you all again. So of these four, we're going to start with trauma-informed care. For those of you who have looked at our webinars, you'll know that the next one is focused completely on trauma-informed care. So this is just a bit of a teaser for that. I'll go into much more detail, but thinking about how are we accounting for experiences of trauma in the work that we do and ensuring, right, back to those guiding principles that we're not doing any harm. Right, so focusing in on the core trauma-informed care approaches of ensuring safety, both in terms of welcoming environments and also the relationship, as you all said, rapport building, having empathy, having genuineness and warmth in the relationship, right? Being trustworthy and, excuse me, transparent. So making sure that we're upholding clear, reliable, and predictable practices and procedures. This goes back to boundaries, how we set expectations and talk about the work that we do. Mutual collaboration, right? How are we working to level the power differential that may be present between us as case managers and clients that we work with, so that we're really elevating the autonomy, the expertise, and the partnership that we're creating in the case management relationship. And then finally, empowerment and choice, right? As we are going to talk about in one of our other approaches, is really recognizing clients' strengths, helping clients learn how to navigate systems and advocate for themselves when they feel comfortable and able to, right? This is also providing validation, as you all said, some active listening skills, really working to walk alongside and empower our clients, having that power with our clients through this process of case management and really honoring their choice. And across all of this, right, we have considerations and are really being mindful of gender, culture, and historical context that also influence experiences of trauma within the working relationship. So again, I know we went through that very quickly, but we will go over that more in our next webinar. And we're going to talk about culturally informed next. Tigist, I'll pass it back.
Thank you, Jess. We're just going to take about a minute or so, looking at what culturally informed approach looks like. What are we considering? What are the variables that play when we think of culture in the context as it relates to our clients' trauma and culture, right? So again, I want to emphasize that not all cultures respond to the same way to trauma, right? There'll be culturally accepted norms for what it means to be well or unwell. And all of these various factors play a part in how the individual responds to trauma. These are just important components to bear in mind. Importantly, thinking more deeply about the history of repeated and ongoing trauma exposure, as you think of religion, as you think of spirituality, what does that and how does that have an impact into the client? What strength is it adding? We should have a strong analysis of our own cultural framework and identity and the larger society we reside in. This, I want to make a point to say, especially if you work with a client whose culture you are sharing with, it's really, really important to still allow the ability to say, tell me more. My context might look different, right? I would work with clients who I shared cultural backgrounds with, and I always have to be very intentional not to make sure and not to have my own cultural framework guide it, because my experience, as I said in the beginning, may not be the same as my client's experience. So really, it's important to increase your self-awareness of your own reaction. Also, how do you integrate trauma-informed care into your work? Needs to reflect gender, as Jess just covered in the previous slide, culture, historical consideration. For example, safety walking home at night looks very different for a male versus a female, right? Police interactions look different depending on the color or of their skin, or depending on the relationship that they had with authorities from the place that they've come before. So these are just some considerations for us to have as we think of culture and how that would guide us. Sorry about that. That is going to be a case that we'll have, but Lauren, I'm going to hand it off to you for the client-centered case management.
Thank you, Tigest. So client-centered case management really brings us to a point of looking at what the needs are in the service and the work together. It helps us to focus on assessing the client's needs, aspiration, goals, and uniqueness, honors and respects their sense of autonomy and self, emphasizes their sense of choice and control, and engages the client rather than prescribing to them what they need to do because you think so. So the client-centered model focuses on their strengths. And how do we do that? We respect and honor their autonomy, emphasize their sense of choice and control, recognize in terms of their statement of need for the service, that it helps us to define the goal-setting part of it. So what are characteristics of a client-centered case manager? Develops a meaningful relationship with them based on empathy, true empathy, can be trusted and treat them with respect and honesty, put the client at the center of their work, for you to focus on their abilities and strengths, support them to make informed choices for themselves and decisions, help them to get the services and benefits they need, very concrete skills and goals, and make sure they have a sense that you are dependable and that you're not going to give up on them because they've had so many changes in their life that they haven't had control of. So this actually takes us to a case scenario. Jess, could I ask you to step in for that one?
Actually, right before we get there, we're going to do our last approach. Then I promise we will do the case study. And so, yeah, thanks, Vaughn. So the fourth and final kind of approach is around being strengths-based. We've talked about this, I feel like, at length in all of the different things that we've covered so far, but really wanting to make sure, as Luan had said earlier, that we're focusing in on internal and external strengths, right? The natural qualities that our clients have that we work with that are really able to help them reach their goals, to acknowledge all of the wonderful ways that they have coped, that they have accessed different resources, that they have survived up until this point, right? So really being able to acknowledge the own expertise. And I know one of our wonderful participants, Kelly, had given the really great example, right, of how we are being strength-based and thinking about what services clients are asking for rather than what they need, right? Thinking about it as giving that sense of empowerment, really embodying that in our work, right? How are we viewing this from a strengths-based perspective and really honoring the expertise, the inherent capacity for growth and change and progress that every individual has. The reasons we do this in our work are to really ensure that we are fostering that sense of trust that all of us have talked about so far. And it's really keeping us kind of oriented towards the goals and the strengths that clients have that have naturally brought them to this point in their lives, right? We get to play a small but important role in our clients' lives to be able to help them recognize strengths, to access services, to be able to really overcome barriers. And so what we're going to do is move into a case scenario. So I know there's a lot here on the screen. I will read it out. But as I'm reading it, and if you all want to follow along and feel comfortable reading it as well, we want you to think about how you might use these 4 different approaches right? In responding to this particular scenario. So in this scenario, you've been working with a client, Hassan, and his wife, Amina, for about 2 months. Amina is pregnant and has been managing intense morning sickness. She has an upcoming prenatal appointment, which her husband, Hassan, is eagerly awaiting. You have met with Hassan and Amina to review the appointment information, the schedule a ride service for the appointment, and talk about what to expect at the appointment, which is next week. But every day for the past week, Hassan has come into the office to see you and to review the appointment information and plan, asking about interpretation, transportation, and the timing of the appointment. The first few times, you worked with him and an interpreter to answer his questions and review and write down the information in a way that was accessible for him. But the most recent times, you've been feeling frustrated because he asks the same questions and comes in without an appointment, choosing to wait in the office until you can see him. You've been very busy with other clients and can't keep meeting with him every day to talk about the same thing. So we'd love to hear from you all in the chat. Using these 4 different approaches, right? Remind you of those 4: client-centered approach, culturally informed, trauma-informed, and strengths-based. What are some of the considerations that you might have in this response? If you're this caseworker and you're feeling a little frustrated by this experience with Hassan. Oh, I see there's a response from Emily. I sense that you are feeling some anxiety about this appointment. What are some deeper concerns? So tapping into that sense of curiosity, trying to understand what's going on with your clients. Yeah, acknowledge that anxiety. Yes, as Felicia's saying, trauma informed, right? Recognizing that their experience might impact memory, right? Thinking about the impact of trauma on our ability to remember. Right, that the client wants to be prepared, right? Asking about, looking for opportunities for connection, right? Maybe a new dad group, by being able to figure out where these kind of worries and concerns are coming from. Thinking about the cultural background, empathy, yes. Ask about past experiences with caseworkers. That's a great suggestion. I see Nan had put that one in, right? Thinking about what are prior experiences in a case management relationship. Right, a lot of acknowledging. I'm seeing so much empathy in your responses, which is just fantastic and really bolstering to see. Right, strength-based, I see, right? He's very present, soon to be a father, right? So being able to see this resourcefulness that for whatever reason, Hassan is continuing to be at the office to get his needs met, right? He's not giving up. Yeah, and I see encouraging him. Beautiful. Okay, y'all have so many great examples, and I know I missed a lot of them. But I want to be able to pause. I think we're going to take a little moment to do some Q&A, I believe. I think we're, sorry, going back to the word cloud.
No
time
problem.
management. We're working on that. So I'm going to pass it off to Tigist, and then we'll do some Q&A. Thank you all so much.
Yes. Thank you, Jess. I just wanted to recognize that we are coming close to our end of time, but that we have some additional slides that we'll be including in the follow-up email that we'll be sending. So you'll see that the supporting adjustment and well-being will be covered, and we'll have that in your slides. So just wanted to mention that. Now, it's now time for our Q&A question session. I know that there has been a lot of questions coming in, which we've all been answering separately as it came in, but I'll just kick us off. We received, over 200 questions during our pre-registration, so most of them hopefully have been answered during our training today. But one of the questions I received is, when the system does not fit the client needs, what do we do to stay in our scope of practice? Who wants to take that answer? Jess, Loan.
I can jump in first, and then I know that you all will have so many great things to add. But I think this is where, when we were talking about kind of the role of the case manager, this is where our role as advocates really comes in, right? So when the system doesn't fit the resources and the services that our clients are asking for, how do we take on that advocacy role, right? That may be in conjunction, right, with the clients that we're working with, and that may also be outside, and us just taking on that advocacy to be able to remind the other service providers of what their duties are, what they're bound to do. For instance, provide interpretation if they are federally funded, right? So that's where I think that kind of justice, equity, advocacy lens comes in.
Thank you, Jess. Lauren, I don't know if
Yeah.
you're unmuting.
Oh,
Okay,
I was
go
just
ahead.
going to add to what Jess is saying, which is really right. It's also checking in terms of community resources, community advocates who can pick up that string with you, and to be able to bring that in focus with the client so that they see that there are other resources outside of the system that actually complements what they may need.
Great. I'm just reviewing a few questions that have come in. There's a question around boundaries. And I know, Lauren, you covered that, but this question says, what about when clients say statements like, I love you, not in a romantic way, or other direct forms of expression? What about when they start to see you as a friend? How do you draw the boundary there? I guess I'll start. I don't know if you're gonna go, but those come up especially in a very various ways, right? Working with youth, working with clients who see you as friends, you're in their home and they start establishing personal relationships. And I think what I would say, or at least what I have done, is really taking it back to the basis of boundaries, right? Reminding them of the professional relationship that you have. Also really acknowledging that that lesson that you give them it goes beyond your relationship with them and would transfer to that kind of relationship that they might have with their supervisors or with their teachers at school. So re-emphasizing and letting them know of your role. My role is, and taking it back to Jess's example, is I am your case manager, right? I am your case manager, and my role is in my work. This is what I get paid to do, so that there is now some separation, recognizing and honoring the time and the stories that they share with you. So really re-emphasize your relationship.
I think also part of it, right, is to be able to say, our relationship has worked so well because you've put in so much good energy. You've been so motivated. And I turn it back to the client to appreciate what they have brought to it that made it work. And I may be comfortable enough to say, not every case management relationship works out so easily, but this is what you did that helps. And I think usually bringing it back to the client helps them to take it in a bit easier.
Great. I have one that I know has been upvoted by a lot of people, so I'll jump right into that. And I might unfortunately say that might be the last question we'll take, but this person says, as an Afghan caseworker, how do I remove myself from day-to-day trauma experience?
I think it's an excellent question, and I'm happy to share a little first, but I also look to both you, Tigist and Juan, to add in as well. I think the impact of the work on all of us, but I think especially those of us who are working within we belong to the communities in which we work, right? That it does pose a whole nother set of kind of complications in how we are impacted and experiencing this work. I think one of the things that we really wanted to talk about today, we ran out of time because we wanted to have this Q&A, is also thinking about how we foster resilience, right, in our work. So how are we able to have that kind of self-care, the care that we provide for ourselves, but not saying that is the only piece of this work. How do we have collective care, right? How do we have that support amongst our colleagues, with supervisors, for creating boundaries, for recognizing when we may need to take a step back from the work to focus on our own mental health and well-being? And also, where do those duty of care resources come in, right? The resources that exist from our organizations to support us in this work, because this is tough work that we do and it impacts each of us differently. But I really would love to hear from Tigist and Milan as well.
I think you covered it really well. Lauren, I don't know if you want to have, and I did say, and I did use my own example of, oftentimes as you do this work and you have a shared either trauma experience, it is oftentimes that you have to be very intentional, right? You have to seek your self-care and also recognize what is enough and what is overwhelming for you to do your job. Sometimes we may have to tap out and kind of tap our colleagues to come in and do the work for us. There has been, and I can give many examples, but there has been some times where you just have to tap out and say, I need help, right? And and that does not speak any, it doesn't mean you're weak. You just are actually being intentional about the work and the ability to provide. At the end of the day, whether we're sharing trauma or not, our clients are always going to be put first, and we don't want to overwhelm our clients with our own kind of baggage and burden that we come with. So just be intentional about how and what space you're giving.
You're absolutely right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think particularly for individuals who have an experience of migration, of forced displacement, sometimes the work can be emotional because it's very internal in terms of your own prior experience. For myself, as someone who has been a refugee, and in keeping the work in picture, I think part of it is seeing that it's not just you. It's all the folks who are attending this webinar right now, over 450 people who are linking across and saying, we need to do this together. And if we can actually take that in and know that we're not alone in this work, I think that helps, and that we can draw that boundary and that line, as Tigist says, because there are many more people who are right next to us to step forward.
Thank you, Lauren. We want to recognize that we have more questions, and if you guys are able to stay a few more minutes, we'll answer after we wrap up. But for now, I do want to say that we have put together recommended resources, and the full list of the references used for this webinar will be shared with you with the follow-up email, so I won't get into the details. Again, these are the learning objectives from today's training, and we hope that you can achieve them. We'll also share and email the list of resources with the PowerPoints and the recording within 24 hours. And before signing off, I really do hope that you'll take us a very short moment to complete our feedback survey. The survey takes less than 1 minute, and it's incredibly helpful for us in improving our trainings going forward. Rebecca should have dropped it by now, and you should see that. And depending on how you join this webinar today, it might also have opened up in a browser, so check that. And finally, here is our contact information. Again, we have thousands of resources or hundreds of resources on our website, and I do hope that you'll stay in touch with us and join us for future trainings. This is one of 4 of the Case Management Foundation's series, so we hope you can join us for the next 3 as well. Thank you so much again for joining today, and a huge thank you to you, Jess and Loanne, and also my co-host, Rebecca Mulqueen. If you all have 2 more minutes, we're happy to stay and answer 1 or 2 more questions. So we'll conclude here, but we'll also just continue to answer 1 or 2 questions. All right, I'll kick us back out to the question part. How can we deal with extra expectations that clients have, as we already gave them the information and cleared everything?
I think all these are fantastic questions. We've been reading through all of them. And I think they just highlight, right, the complexities of this role as being a case manager. but I think I'd be curious to think about, like, what are these extra expectations, right? So what are we considering as extra versus what is the client's expectation of case management, right? Maybe we did give them information already and we did go through all of the roles and expectations, but do we need to have a conversation, right? That may not be just a one-sided, right? Shouldn't be just a one-sided, like, here I am, Jess, this is exactly what I'm going to do, and here we go, let's jump into it, right? Having a conversation, say, well, have you worked with the case manager before in the past? What does that look like? What have been some things that have been really helpful for you? Or what are things that didn't go well in working with a case manager, right? So being able to learn from previous service experience and provide that opportunity to say, what do you expect of me? What are some of the things that you want to get out of this relationship, so that you can have a conversation to really understand, are the expectations appropriate? Are they realistic? And then to be able to have a process of negotiation, right? What is realistic? What is appropriate? And that it might take repetition, right? To remind our clients of these expectations, of these kind of boundaries that we have within the case management relationship. So I will pause there and allow others to jump in.
I think you've covered it, Jess, and again, want to honor people's time and thank you all for joining us. We hope that the webinar has given you some insight, and we do hope that, and do have looked at the questions, and we'll try to incorporate the answers to those questions in our upcoming webinars in the next 3 sessions. So again, thank you all for joining us, and have a good evening.
Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.